Okay, well, welcome to our regulatory Q&A with Oliver Christ and Kim Troutman. I'm James Pink. I'd like to welcome you all to this question and answer session. Before we begin with our introductions, if we could just explain some of the options. If you look to the right of your screen in the control panel, particularly if you're using a desktop, you'll see an icon there with questions. You're more than happy to submit any questions that you have. We will endeavour to answer them live on the chat and also in viva voce from either Kim or Oliver, or we will also ensure that we are able to evaluate the question, and of course we'll try our best to be able to respond via email as well. If you're using an iPad or a tablet, you should see a question mark feature at the top of the screen that you can click again to submit your questions. If you're actually on the app, then you should be able to see within your mobile device the particular information associated at the bottom of the taskbar. If you look at the screen, there is a section there for questions, and I will be monitoring those questions as we go along. So please kindly, as Kim or Oliver are speaking or answering any of the questions, please put them into the question function or into the chat function, and that would be really helpful. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome firstly Kim Troutman to our Q&A session. Kim, so welcome.
Thank you, James. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. So my name is Kim Troutman. I'm the Executive Vice President for Medical Device International Services at NSF International. I've been in the industry for over 30 years. I have a master's in biomedical engineering. I've worked for the US FDA and the Center for Devices for over 24 years. I had a fantastic career at FDA, was able to participate in many international activities. I helped to develop the Global Harmonization Task Force. I was actually the primary author for the Quality System Regulation back in 1996. I was also and continue to be on the ISO Technical Committee 210, Working Group 1, which authors the 13485 standard, and several other standards group. Also, as I like to refer to it, as my non-biological child, developed the Medical Device Single Audit Program. Actually wrote about it as part of the rollout for the Quality System Regulation back in 1996. But like anything international, it takes time to put anything into place internationally. So it wasn't until 2011, and now everybody knows about the MDSAP program as well. So welcome today, and thank you very much. One of the things that I wanted to do on the next slide was just to briefly kind of give you some key takeaways from the talk that we had at the MedTech Summit seminar, which was fabulously successful. But we received a lot of questions, and we are using this opportunity to hopefully reach out to more people and to answer some of them. But in that presentation that I happened to be able to give, some of the key global regulatory trends impacting your quality management system aren't necessarily all that straightforward. So in the talk, we discussed recognizing substantial changes within your QMS that will be necessary in order to comply with the new global expectations. Of course, the EU MDR, the EU IVDR, some new expectations in the US, as well as other global entities. UK, for example, with Brexit happening and the new UK CE mark are also some additional considerations. The second item was identifying the correlation between risk management, clinical evaluation, and post-market surveillance. And we did spend a bit of time during the conference discussing those interrelationships and how important that was within the quality management system. And then last, reflecting on the importance of that coordinating effort within the company related to all these different requirements with respect to certification, recertification, and global expectations. So that was just a little overview, but what I'd like to do right now is I would like to toss it over to Oliver for Oliver to give a brief introduction of himself and his presentation.
Yeah, let me welcome everybody in this chat here with question and answers. If I'm counting correct, we are representatives in this call from 12 different countries. Yeah, so we representing here the globe in a certain way. At the summit, I presented a little bit the big picture under which the MDR is happening, in particular the end of the transition period. Please go to the next slide. I made a prediction about the COVID development, and my prediction was at end of transition period we have to handle on the whole globe with 2 million dead people, and we will see travel restrictions and other problems. My predictions were conservative 5 weeks ago. I said we might have a global death toll of 6,600 people and maybe new infections of 333,000. Maybe reality is a little bit ahead of this prediction already. Go to the next slide. If we want to understand the bigger picture, we have to accept that the pandemic doesn't go away by itself. It's equally distributed over the globe. We will have 100 million of cases, approximately, infected people around the end of the transition period and the death toll I mentioned. So even if we have now 2 candidates on the vaccine, obviously in the game, to deploy that among the population will need the full next year. We have to anticipate travel restrictions, and that's also for audits. And we have to anticipate that if we want to unfold an effective MDR program, we need also for the initial MDR certification audits a kind of remote clearance. This is currently not the case. So if you go further to the next slide, I guess in the presentation, I presented a statement that the number of personnel currently working for the 17 notified bodies under MDR is not sufficient. I identified a lack of approximately more than 1,000 headcounts if we want to deploy the service for everybody who requested. And this creates some issues if certain stakeholders won't get serviced by notified bodies. Maybe come during our discussion back to this. The latest status on the harmonization program for Europe is that 14 days ago, the EU Commission has initiated a second draft document for a standardization request. It's not confirmed yet. And we have to anticipate that we don't see harmonized standard for the next 18 to 36 months under the new EU MDR. We will answer your question now about MDR in a more specific way, and we will cover even questions for the big picture economical impacts as needed. Thank you very much. I go back to James.
Well, thank you very much, Oliver. Thank you very much, Kim. I think we have our first questions we offered out to the audience via email an hour prior to this call, so we're just curating those questions as we speak. And one of the questions that we're immediately asked is, and this is to Kim, how to include device accessories in post-market surveillance plans, post-market clinical follow-up, etc., and if they are supposed to be included under the same basic unique device identification as the device they are intended for.
Okay, thank you. So let's deal with the UDI question first, because it's a little bit more straightforward in the fact that accessories do have their own categorization and risk classification. So they will be part and parcel of the basic UDI. So they will require that basic UDI of the entire system, and have to be called out because they are, you know, as an accessory, are coded as a medical device as well. Now, when we look at post-market surveillance or post-market clinical follow-up, it's really not meaningful if we just look at the accessories in isolation. So the first thing you have to do, whether it's the accessories or your products, is really group them according to intended use. So if you have a family of different accessories, grouping them according to your intended use, and then grouping them with the overall system that they're meant to interact or interface with. And that's where the meaningful PMS and PMCF type data will be able to be collated, assessed, and looked at. Again, part of that overall system, you may be looking at aspects of, different failure modes and so forth that may include just the accessory, but because the accessory is expected to have an interaction or an interface, you have to be able to put that together with the entire system. It's a very good question.
Thank you very much, Kim. That's a great answer as well. Thank you. And over to Oliver. One of the questions from our email is, are Article 13, 14 and 16, that is the importers, distributors, and those obligations of those economic operators that may, make them manufacturers, are they applicable for all devices distributed after the 26th of May 2021, which I assume is when the EU MDR comes into force, or only devices manufactured or certified under the medical device regulation?
That's a very interesting question, and let's work on it. I mean, the underlying concept of the new MDR is that at the date when this becomes finally effective on May 26 in 2021, the old directive text of the MDD becomes obsolete. So a day later, nobody can reference any longer to MDD. You have products in the market which has a grace period until 2024, but the underlying MDD as a letter of the law is withdrawn. So implicitly, for all products, we have to follow now Article 13, 14, and 16. That's
okay,
my working assumption here.
Thank you, Oliver. Kim, a question for you. With respect to ISO 14971, what happens as a manufacturer if they've not transitioned to the new 2019 standard, both from the US and, under the EU MDR, the European perspective?
Sure. So typically there is the conception that you'll have a transition period of 3 years. Again, that is nothing that is set by the standards writers. The standards writers, whether that be TC 210 or whomever the standards are, they write the standard, but the enforcement of that actually goes to an organization called CASCO, which is a conformity assessment group. Now, CASCO and the International Accreditation Forum handle different types of management system requirements and different enforcement of standards, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything in the regulatory scheme. So in the regulatory schemes, each regulator really needs to express how they will use the standards and what particular version of the standard. With respect to FDA placed the 14971 2019 version on their harmonized list of standards. Now remember, there's different definitions of what harmonized standards means. In the US, a harmonized standard is simply that you can use that standard and submit summary data as part of a market application, and you do not have to submit all the data, okay? Now that's very different than having a harmonized standard in the EU that's published in the official journal, because there's a little bit different presumption of conformity to the entire standard. So you really have to understand that in different regulatory jurisdictions, the concept of harmonized standards can be very, very different. So in the US, there's nothing that forces you to use that standard of 14971. It is obviously something that FDA refers to. It's something that FDA relies upon, but it's not required. So you would have to exert why you are using an old standard versus the new one, or lay out a plan. So it was a little bit more flexibility with the FDA, but they immediately, within weeks, harmonized that standard after it was issued last December. Now the EU is a little bit different. So as you already heard Oliver give you the most current up-to-date issue or announcement of what's going on with harmonized standards in Europe, we know that the Commission and CENELEC have not come to any particular agreement on harmonized standard under the directives. not for 13485, not for 14971. So as you heard Oliver say, at best, we may have some harmonized standards in 2021. At worst, it could be another 2 years, okay? It really could be. If Sen and elect don't agree with some of the commission's recommendations and so forth. So with that, all the notified bodies have is the regulation, which says state of the art, okay? And I've been on many, many conferences over this past fall, and several of the notified bodies have publicly stated that state of the art for any particular standard is going to be the most current version of that standard. So de facto 14971, December 2019. In fact, I have already had clients that have been cited by their notified bodies for not already starting or having transition plans or moving to the 2019 version as early as January and February before COVID. All right, so we've got notified bodies out there already saying, look, we've got state of the art, 2019 version is the state of the art. There's really no such thing as 3-year transition because you all have had final DISs or draft international standards. So the expectation was that industry was moving along with the standards and was ready for it when it was published practically a year ago. So the expectation in Europe is that you are utilizing and have at least mapped out any transition for some of the differences from the old or previous version of 14971 to the new one. And the expectation is that you're moving pretty fast in actually adopting and utilizing that standard. And as I discussed in the talk at MedTech Summit, that is so important. Having that risk management tied to the latest regulatory expectations, having that pulled through your entire quality management system, all the way from pre-production, through production, through post-production, is really what the notified bodies are looking for these days. So okay. Great question.
I'd like to keep to the theme of ISO 14971 because we've got another question as well that's come through. This relates more to the qualitative and quantitative risk management data. And what's your experience on what the reg authorities are actually requesting or expecting in terms of the qualitative versus quantitative data requirements?
Great question, because technically 14971 2019 allows the user of the standard to use either. But in my experience with our clients, we are finding that the competent authorities are absolutely requiring the quantitative. So just as a quick, rundown, qualitative being something, like the charts, the risk management charts, the green, yellow, red charts, quantitative being actual numbers. And how this is coming out is really through the vigilance system. So the competent authority, when they are assessing vigilance, they are asking the manufacturer for some very, very specific numbers with respect to failure rates, residual risk, and not just the failure rates of failure rates for individual failures, as well as the overall residual risk. So failure rates and risk benefit calculations, again, not only for the overall, but for line items. So is this an expected failure? What is that quantitative number that you're looking at to know that something is within the norm or starting to bounce higher than your expected norm? And so they are asking for the numbers and are not accepting that traditional qualitative data that is those charts and everything else. So while the standard allows you to do both, it appears that the competent authorities are really, really pushing you towards that quantitative data, which de facto means that the notified bodies are going to be pushing that as well.
Okay, well, thank you, Kim. Oliver, one of the questions that we've had with respect to the pandemic, you made a prediction for future infection rates, which was over 333,000 infections per day, with a death toll that was an estimate of around or more than 6,000 deaths per day. That appears shockingly high, and that was 5 weeks ago. Are you now being more conservative with your prediction, or are you? What is your prediction saying?
Also, if you monitor the data available from Johns Hopkins and others universities, what we get broadcasted every day, my predictions today look a little bit outdated. Yeah, they look too conservative. Currently, we have 600K incidents per day, and we have more than 10,000 people dying every day on this globe, on the pandemic. So my predictions were conservative, but the conclusive answer was we will see by end of the transition period 2+ million in dead people, and that will have a consequence to the way we have to operate. Yeah, we are dependent from medical devices, but if we can't release it under MDR because remote audits, initial audits are currently not permitted in Europe, we're running in a deadlock situation. And by predicting these numbers, I want to show how important it is to understand we have to execute MDR under the reality check of COVID.
Okay, thank you, Oliver. And on to that point, one of the questions that we've got, this is a fantastic question, really, in terms of the impact that this second, maybe third wave would have on conformity assessments and on, you know, the actual medical devices industry, particularly with those manufacturers, you know, facing a very, very difficult transition period, not helped, of course, by the pandemic, but also extended as a result of it. So what do you think the impact will be as a result of this second wave on the devices industry?
Also very honestly, the second wave has just started, even if it has that terrible numbers. If you look around in Europe, in countries like Belgium, yeah, and even UK, we have not a very good prediction whether the hospital capacity will be enough. Yeah, also Belgium is at limit. Italy is coming shortly at limit. That means you have not enough capacity in intensive care, not enough medical devices to treat patients. So we are dependent from the availability of medical devices, and that will be heavily needed in the next 3 to 6 months. And if we have any restrictions on getting them on the market, we would shooting ourselves in the foot. We could not effectively mitigate the pandemic.
Okay, thank you, Oliver.
And if I can add, I'm sorry, James, if I can add to that, there's also the practical reality of manufacturing plants just trying to stay open. I mean, you've got employees, and no matter how hard companies may be trying to enforce masks, spacing, and everything else, as soon as you have a case, there is, you know, requirements to shut down, to clean. So there should be anticipated and plans should be in place for medical device manufacturers. Again, now it's part of your QMS. You know, sometimes at FDA, the FDA investigators would ask in certain areas about in your QMS procedures for flooding or procedures for earthquakes, depending on the particular region. In this case, really, your QMS should be looking at having some procedures as what's going to happen if you have to shut down that plant. You know, are you just going to stop lines in midstream? Are you going to, you know, how is product that's moving from one place to another? Where and how is your QMS going to handle a potential shutdown of the manufacturing facility if something happens and the plant needs to be shut down and cleaned and so forth? So these are other things that people should be planning for now, because in many cases it may be inevitable as the instances rise.
Yeah.
Over the winter.
I think that might be appropriate as well, not just to manufacturers, Kim, but perhaps the notified bodies themselves. That, you know, ultimately human beings that all got families, got different situations themselves, traveling in different areas, trying to get from one place to another. One would imagine that, you know, those contingencies have to also extend into the actual conformity assessment system as well. Just a question to you as well, Kim, that's been raised from today, which is what are some of the actual non-conformities that you've been finding from your clients have been finding over the course of any of the EU MDR audits to date?
Yeah, so again, most of this has been prior to the shutdowns in March, but the first thing I'd like to tell everybody is your stage 2 certification audit that is going to be on site, at least as Oliver says, until something changes. But again, whether it's on site or it's a virtual, and remember, a virtual/remote audit is not the same thing as a desk audit, okay? But either way, the stage 2 certification audit is looking very, very different than what most companies have ever seen a notified body do before. It is not your typical QMS audit. It is not your MDSAP audit. Literally, the notified bodies are coming in and taking the technical documentation, taking the labeling, the intended use, and the risk management, and really pulling it through the QMS. And the problem that we saw early in this year is there was a lot of companies that were working really, really hard to do this transition, and they set up work groups. And the work groups did a really great job, you know, for the most part, in doing their assigned tasks. Where the companies that were even being very proactive still were having difficulties was pulling it through some of those different work groups. So, you know, different work groups that may have been working on labeling might not have adequately communicated and done work with some of their post-market surveillance work groups. And so when the notified bodies came in and they started pulling certain things like risk management through labeling, through intended use, all the way through to post-market surveillance, the CERs and so forth, there was some definite holes. There was definite holes because the companies really did not robustly secure the linkages or integration. Now, what that's done is it's made for some unusual write-ups, if you will. Not to say they're wrong, but there's been a lot of non-conformances that were written up against clinical evaluation reports, post-market surveillance reports. And it's not, honestly, if you look at some of them, it's not the CER per se. Many of them, the underlying root cause to the problem was legacy risk management systems and risk management systems that were not technically robust, okay? So that is what I was absolutely seeing when we were still doing some of the certification audits earlier this year, is things were being written up in a whole bunch of different ways, but one of the major themes was that the root cause of many of them were risk management system, risk management data that depended upon legacy files that they did not adequately remediate to these new risk management expectations. And I am here to tell you, those expectations have gone from here to here, substantially different. And for those of you that have thousands of SKUs of legacy products, there's really quite a bit of work there. And you should hopefully be using this extra time that was given with the extra year to COVID to really make those foundational changes robust, such that you don't fall into that. Because again, many of my clients have had the same notified body for 20 some years. That same notified body had reviewed that technical file for those same 20 years and it was fine. And then now all of a sudden they're getting walloped with a dozen or more major non-conformances.
Yeah, I think the on reflection as well, those three really critical recitals, sort of recital 32 for the QMS being proportionate to the device risk type, and of course the interactions in 33 as you described between that risk management system, CER, and of course the post-market, and then the actual active and systematic elements in 74 are definitely striking a very clear tone. And many of the notified bodies, if you've explained within conferences, but also within their own communications, are making it very, very clear that there are no legacies here. This is going to be assessed absolutely full bore against the requirements of the MDR and of course against the IVDR when that one sort of strikes in. So it's really, really good advice, Kim. I'm sure
one other point that's coming up, and I know FDA has really been handling it rather lightly in the past, is the whole issue of social media. And now more and more, we're really having notified bodies question what manufacturers are doing with social media, especially their own social media sites. Okay, so that's really the first place to start, is number one, being able to clearly articulate what social media sites the company has. And it's surprising to me, I worked with one client and they came back, for example, and I think they told me that they owned 12 social media sites. I handed off a quick ad hoc assignment to my university-age daughter and said, hey, find me as many social media sites as you can for this manufacturer. She came back with almost double that. Okay, and these were all sites that the company owned. All right, so number one, you have to get marketing, you got to get sales, you got to get all kinds of people at least understand what your social media sites are, and you should have some sort of procedure in place that really says how you're going to measure and monitor that from a proactive source. Now, it's not simple, okay? It is absolutely not simple, because in social media there is a lot of emotion and not a lot of facts, to be quite frank. So there has to be a pretty discerning eye as to what areas, what aspects might require follow-up, because it's going to be significant resources to really go in and have some of that follow-up. But you should be contemplating this. You should at least know what social media sites you have, how you're at least going to monitor them. Right now, at least some sort of mechanism of, if you see ABC, how are you going to then pull that into your post-market surveillance activities? Again, it is something that's coming up more and more and more.
That's great. Thank you very much, Kim. We've just had another couple of questions coming in through. Oliver, this question relates to one of the things that struck a chord with respect to your predictions, and of course the stress or strain with respect to the capacity of EU notified bodies. You mentioned that they may not necessarily have the sufficient capacity, and that your prediction was approximately 20% of all medical device manufacturers who will need a notified body will not get the necessary service. That's obviously quite scary to one of our delegates. So what would be your proposal to solve that shortage on notified body capacities in 2021 off the back of a pandemic, and of course all of these other pervasive issues? What would be your piece of magic that you would spring up?
Like my name is Christ, piece of magic. Thank you for that question, James. And I think actually you built already a bridge to the answer when you commented a few minutes ago. Also, notified body personnel could become sick, and they could retract COVID, and they could have to stay in quarantine. That could also happen. But I think currently, I think we have 70 notified bodies listed under MDR and 4 under IVDR. Yeah, the number, how many notified bodies coming into play, is not my concern. We had maybe 58 or 85 on the peak at under MDD, but they were very small. And now we have very big notified bodies. But when you look at let me say, behavior of notified bodies, if somebody calls in, they say we are fully booked. Yeah, and we serve with priority number 1 our old clients. Yeah, they don't say it so direct, but that's actually the messaging. So if you are in a situation that your old notified body is not continuing under MDR, and you are forced to go to another notified body, you have to queue up, and you may get a slot or you don't get a slot. Yeah, and that is not necessarily fair. Yeah, if you want to have a free market, everybody who needs a notified body should get notified body service. Okay, so under a pandemic, we could make a very unique proposal. Okay, if we go back 10 years in history, the old plan, at least it existed, was to build a European FDA. That was the idea of the EU Commission 10 years ago. Okay, it never worked out. Okay, so we came with scrutiny processes in the new regulation, but we have never ever got a European FDA. What would happen if the EU Commission would offer every notified body a credit line? Just a credit line in money, and say, please hire as many people as you could. You don't have to be profitable in 2022 and 2023, but you have to help us to have full capacity. That would indirectly link the notified body back to the, let me say, control of the Commission. It's completely logical. Under a pandemic, we help restaurants, we help airlines. Why don't we help notified bodies? But currently, notified bodies have a lot of financial pressure. They have recruited a lot of personnel. They train it for 2 years until this personnel becomes profitable, and they couldn't bring the service on the street yet. So I think from a society standpoint, we need full capacity, and a pragmatic proposal could be help with a credit line notified bodies to grow.
Yeah, it's a great observation. I think as well, I've seen recently at European member state level the first actual award in terms of, I'm not going to name the amount of money, but for the first time actually you know, a member state offering money to subsidize or as a grant to establish a notified body because of the, you know, the very clear dearth of availability and capacity. And I don't think it's just as a result of the pandemic, is it, Oliver? I think it's a result, quite frankly, of the extreme demand for certain technological areas and for certain, you know, you know, certain skill sets as well. So yeah, it's a very pragmatic suggestion that you make there. So I wonder how we can get that one communicated into the Commission level. Just another question, which it does relate. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, if I can just add. So, you know, the questioner was really focused in on maybe somebody that wants a new notified body. But what I'd like to add also is for those that have a current notified body, a few of those very early prominent big ones have instituted what they have publicly called the 3-strike rule, okay? And that is, you know, the fact that you will send in your application and you will basically have the opportunity to answer any deficiencies that the notified bodies may have. But on the 3rd strike, in other words, the 3rd time that your application comes in and it's not satisfactory, that your application is going to be kicked out and you basically go to the back of the queue. Yeah. So even those manufacturers that are, you know, the old clientele, there is a very big risk. And so it's so important right now. This is not one of those occasions where I would recommend people to jump in early. So when MDSAP was first coming out, when audits to 13/485/2016 were first coming out, I was the first one to say, jump in early, learn with the notified bodies, go with it. That is not the case for this. This is the situation where you want to be putting your best foot forward. You want to be having scrutiny, get somebody on the outside to scrutinize your technical documentation, get someone on the outside to have a mock audit, because your timeline to your MDR cert can get crushed if you send in that MDR application and you don't have it well established and you have those three strikes or 3 deficiencies and you get booted. And then really, how far back is that line? Probably pretty huge. So be very careful. And many of the notified bodies are quite openly talking about that policy.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kim and Oliver. And I really like this question that's now come from one of our delegates in the Q&A session. So and just be careful, because I'm the resident Brit does not make me the expert on this. But the question is, will Brexit enhance the problems of notified body availability? So who'd like to take that, Kim or Oliver?
Well, I'll start, and I'm sure then Oliver can add. So, of course, Brexit's already happened, right, folks? Brexit is 11 months in now. So most of the current notified bodies have already made contingency plans. You know, we know, for example, that BSI has their UK location still, and that's the only UK notified body that is currently, you know, recognized by the government, but they also have their Belgium legal entity and so forth. So for the most part, many of them that have decided to continue on mainland Europe have already made those decisions back 2017, 2018, and so forth. The interesting part is now with the transition starting in January of 2021 until the end of June 2023, that is the transition period that the UK is using before they issue their own new regulations. And they have now said that they will not be adopting the EU MDR and IVDR verbatim, that they are going to have a rulemaking process. They're going to look at other jurisdictions around the world and pick and choose what they feel is best. So we're going to have a new set of regulations. and they are going to have what they call UK, it's not designated, I think it's authorized bodies. So there actually may be a chance to have, more UK-based auditing and authorized bodies kind of crop up that will serve at least the British Isles. So if you really get into some of the transition, there's provisions that are very, very specific for Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is going to stay with the EU MDR, IVDR. There's all kinds of great information that the UK has been putting out here of late on how they're going to transition to their UK CA mark. But I think those notified bodies that have already, been in the system have made provisions, and there may be actually more opportunities for smaller notified bodies to come in and to service the new UK system. So don't think that it's going to hurt. If anything, it might help. But again, like you mentioned, James, there's a definite finite number of technical experts and or auditors, and that's going to be the limiting factor. Oliver, what do you think?
So first of all, I want to give UK credit for the agencies. They have worked hard in the last 20 years to build the EU model. Okay, we had a lot of expertise coming out of UK as input into MDD, into MDR, into everything. So I'm really sorry that UK is leaving that economical community. I'm not so concerned for next year because I guess that the contingency planning for medical devices is in place. Okay, in 2-3 years, that's a different picture. But what I don't understand is what will happen if we have no treaty signed on the economical exchange of goods and services by end of the calendar year. So simple things like if you want to send a sample device from the EU into Great Britain, it doesn't get shipped because of tax purposes. There might be any kind of payment to do until you can do trade. Nobody knows this. And that could be a disruptive situation in January, midden of the second wave of the pandemic. That's not a good thing.
And Oliver, that's pretty much the same thing with Switzerland, right? That MRA hasn't.
Yeah, and to my best knowledge, they haven't signed their new treaty as well. I haven't heard any confirmation. They are in the process to do this. They also stuck right now.
I think that's a really good observation, Oliver. I mean, obviously, as a bloke who's worked with the MHRA very closely on many occasions, we all know, all of us, all three of us know just how much participation there has been at a technical level into both the MDD, MDR from the UK. And I really like the statement that you made that we might not be having much input at the economic or the trade level, but the knowledge, the expertise from the UK, I am sure will still be sort of maintained across the IMDRF and all the other technical forum, including European Forum as well, because there is obviously a lot of expertise, experience, and knowledge in there. And this is another question that's just been poised, and it sort of goes at that technical level versus a trade level. And that is, will the EU accept both the CE mark and the new UK CA mark? So I guess what the question really is, and I'm sorry if I'm misrepresenting this question, please do put into the chat if I am, but I guess it really means, will Europe accept the UK CA mark if the device is sold in Europe? Or they might be asking, will they accept that it both got the CE and the UK CA? Who wants to take that one?
So we can look at both aspects of the question. And number one is, right now both sides have said that they would not accept the other. So the Commission has said that they will not accept the UK CA mark, and the UK has said that after July of 2023, that's a tongue twister, that they will not be accepting the CE mark. Now, like Oliver said, if you can get some trade, good mutual recognition agreements or something like that, that may change. But right now, that is the answer. The other aspect that may be the questioners, because I've actually had a client that had this, is right now people are already registering under the new UK system. And right now, they have to, in essence, on the label, have both, okay? So they're getting prepared for January. And as of January of 2021, the system of registering in the UK and everything kicks in. So they're registering it. They're already preparing applications. And one client is being so forward-thinking that they already have their labeling that has both marks. Now, when they submitted that labeling already to MHRA, the initial response before the most recent Q&A document was released, the initial response was that you can't have both marks on the label. And we went back to MHRA and we said, well, what the heck are we going to do? MHRA, very, very pragmatic, then have come back and say, yes, 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 yes. During January of 2021 through June of 2023, you can co-label it with both marks. And then in the most recent Q&A document that's been released, they've clarified that and said that both marks will be acceptable on the label. But then after July of 2023, we'll have to see. But right now, neither of the two marks are going to be accepted in the other region's jurisdiction.
Okay, thank you very much. Oliver, would you like to add to that? Are you okay?
Yeah, I mean, from a political standpoint, I mean, currently the compliance models are identical. All medical devices built in UK up to date are built according MDD, or people have originally prepared for MDR. I don't see a much deviation what the meaning of the two signs are. Okay, in 2 years from now, we will see changes in the UK regulations, and we will stay with our MDR model. So in 2 years, the meaning of the two signs are different, okay, because they represent a different regulation. And Europe cannot accept, by definition, that another, let me say, access point, is equal to the CE mark. I mean, we have to stick with the CE mark and with the conformity declaration according Annex 1 of MDR.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so a couple more questions, two remaining thus far. You can still, as a quick note, you can still add to the chat if you wish. I'm still monitoring that. So if you do have any further questions, then by all means, we have about 10 minutes to go, 14 minutes to go before we have to draw a close on this. But Kim, this is one further question and final question for yourself, directed for yourself, is ultimately. Oh, excuse me, I've just lost the thread. There you go. Sorry, Kim. How important is it to adopt the new IMDRF? I would say that, and also the manufacturer's incident reporting, adverse event reporting codes. And why do I need to tie these to my risk management system? That's an interesting question.
So it's absolutely essential that you adopt the codes for two major purposes. Number one, FDA has made it a two-part project where last summer they have formally adopted the first half of the IMDRF codes, and then here at the end of the summer in August, they finalized the adoption of the rest of the IMDRF codes. So the US has completely adopted those codes, as well as the EU Commission. So the EU Commission in several of their documents have come out and said for the MRF form, which is the Adverse Event Vigilance form, that you are required to use the IMDRF codes. So it's required in two major economic jurisdictions. So it's very, very important. And we know that signatures to that also are Japan. Japan actually was the chair for this IMDRF work group. Australia, Canada, Brazil. So you can see that the snowball is rolling, and all these other countries are also adopting the adverse event report codes. Now, the interesting part, if you really dig into this, not every single code, but in the annexes of the IMDRF document, there's a couple annexes that are really, really key that get into failure investigation codes and so forth. That is the beauty now of taking some of this proactively and lining it up with your risk management tables. So if you have your appropriate tables for your hazards, your hazardous situations, which gives you, your harms, and you tie some of those line items specifically to some of those IMDRF codes, now you start getting some of that quantitative line item information that the regulators we talked about earlier are expecting. So it's a perfect way to start integrating some of these different initiatives. It really, really is. And you should be doing it now. If you're going to be updating your risk management system, whether it be for 14971 2019, for the EU regulations, every opportunity where you've got change, might as well make a change that's forward thinking. And forward thinking utilizing these codes will be really, really helpful. And one of the things that I do want to caution you on, though, is many people, in my experience in the industry, have often, in complaint handling and any type of adverse event reporting, attributed use or user error and then kind of just pushed it aside. The user did not use the device according to the instructions for use. So that's the justification for closing that. We are finding right now that if you are coding it as a use or a user error, that is actually being flagged by some of the European competent authorities. And they are challenging the manufacturers as to not just why are you not updating your IFU, but remember the new regulations really kind of force you to reduce the risk as low as possible. They're asking, why aren't you redesigning the product? So here's another reason why tying the IMDRF codes to particular risk management line items is going to be really, really key, and really focus and be very specific as to when you may use some of those codes for use or user error, and be prepared to justify with usability studies and other scientific data as to what actions you are taking and why you're not taking either further steps in possible redesign. So be very, very careful. It's really been interesting how those codes have actually been flagged for some of them.
Okay, thank you very much, Kim. Oliver, would you like to add anything to that with respect to the MIR or the IMDRF coding?
If you allow me, and in the remaining time, if you could go back to one of my intro slides. Yep. I think it was the last intro slide. I skipped intentionally at the beginning 3 bullet points. And I was considering if we might have time back at the end, but I would like to draw the attention to a topic, bullet 6 here. I think currently the world market invests approximately 10% of the world GDP into healthcare. In the pandemic, we see an attitude that other industry fails. I call it the dirty industries. Yeah, they currently fail and they won't come back. So if you look, there is a lot of money, trillions of dollars out looking for investments. And if we don't get our European system up and running, the EU MDR, enough capacity on notified bodies, remote virtual audits even the first time, that medical devices get on the road by May this or next year, then I would say we have not only a problem about our compliance, we have also an investment problem. The money is waiting to be invested into medical devices to help to survive the pandemic, and because money is available to go into investment, but we have to make that possible. And I guess we will see a lot of merger and acquisitions next year. We will see a lot of IP, which is sold from one entity to another entity. And all these products need a status as compliant to the latest regulations. So it becomes essential to open that door that enough products can be placed on the EU market. That was an insight I would like to encourage everybody who's attending today's session.
No, thank you very much, Oliver. Very pertinent. I think what we've learned is obviously the importance of, our quality management systems and our technical documentation, and how important it is to ensure that we're up to speed with our risk management processes and programs, ensuring that they are interacting with our post-market and of course our clinical. We had some good discussions about, you know, the post-market follow-up, the PMS plans. Oliver, the information with respect to notified body capacity and those elements in particular surrounding the pandemic that may inflame or aggravate the ability of the best laid plans to actually come off are something that we're learning quite quickly at this moment in time as being a major factor to an organization's ability to be able to respond and remain resilient within the marketplace as a result of these factors. And I think, you know, just listening to both of you answer these questions, I do like the final question that's been presented to us, and I saved the best till last, of course, which is, you know, it's clearly we need a soft landing, guys. That's what we need. So how are we going to get that soft landing? What is going to be necessary for the EU market so that we can have a smooth end for this transition period in 6 months? Any words of wisdom there?
Yeah, let me link that answer to what I just mentioned on the economy side. I mean, I really want to encourage the whole system beyond our question and answer session here, that we open our market access in Europe for remote virtual first-time MDR audits. It's very essential. If we have a roadblocker by end of May and products get on stock, but we can't ship it to the market, that would be the worst case scenario. Yeah. So we have to make sure that not only in the soft period by going old MDD certificates extended till 2024, but also making the road free for new MDR certificates. And unfortunately, this is only possible if we can do virtual audits.
Yeah, and I always remember, you know, the words of Dali when sort of wanting to have these regulations aligned with the pharmaceutical industry, is that yes, we can have a precautionary system, but in the world of public health, we have to also ensure that our governments, our market, you know, our member states, our jurisdictions make devices available that have those positive impacts as well. And I think sometimes in the world of regulation, we do sort of harp far too close to the precautionary principle rather than the proportionality principle. And I guess one of the things that we should be encouraging as manufacturers, as notified bodies, competent authorities, anyone involved in the regulation and, you know, the provision of devices in this world, is to ensure that we don't lose that focus of how essential these devices are to our own well-beings, particularly in the face, you know, of these pandemics. So guys, I really thank you very much for firstly taking the time, Kim and Oliver, to attend to our delegates' questions. Anybody who's still on the line, you know, more than happy to answer any questions that you may send through via email. I sent through an email earlier. If you wish, we can field those. But I think you know, there's been a very you know, rich series of responses from our resident experts on the EU MDR and of course on our general international regulatory systems as well. Should you wish for more information, in particular with the in vitro diagnostics, we have an app that we would encourage you to download. It's jam-packed full of the latest news, the guidances, the regulations, and of course any particular training. There's an option in there to ask an expert. So all you need to do is, you know, go to the relevant app store or the Google Play and just look at NSF IVD app. We also put information from the MDCG and anything that we feel is pertinent with respect to devices as well. So don't feel that it's just completely focused on in vitro diagnostics. It's focused on the regulatory system and the regulatory intelligence that we're having. But in the meantime, you know, I would like to draw this to a close. And again, finally extend my thanks formally to Kim and Oliver. And if you wish to contact NSF, then by all means, you can see on the screen now our contact details. And without further ado, thank you very much. Last words?
Nope, thank you all, and don't forget to keep plugging on. Don't use any extensions unwisely. Keep working and plugging forward to transition to those new regulations regardless. Thank you all.
Stay safe and healthy, okay? Thank you for attending. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.